Unaware his pregnant wife is daughter of a secret trillionaire who died recently, he lets mistress humiliate his wife and their twins at a Christmas party until he sees the guest list. Part 2. 3 months after Evelyn Carter walked out of that Christmas party as the secret daughter of a trillionaire, her ex-husband Mark did something that proved he'd learned absolutely nothing. He filed for full custody of their twins and demanded half of everything she inherited, claiming he'd been deceived into marrying a woman who'd hidden her true identity. But Mark made one critical mistake. He forgot that the pregnant wife he'd let his mistress humiliate in front of the most powerful people in the country wasn't just rich now. She owned the law firms he hired, the judges reviewing his case, and the media outlets that could destroy him with a single headline. What he didn't know was that his lawyers had already been contacted by Evelyn's people before he even signed the papers, and every move he was planning had been anticipated, documented, and was about to be used against him in ways he couldn't imagine. The morning Mark's custody petition arrived at Evelyn's estate, delivered by a nervous process server who apologized 3 times before handing it over. She was sitting in her father's old office, now hers, 7 months pregnant, and reviewing files that revealed something that made the Christmas party humiliation look like a warm-up act. Her father hadn't just built a financial empire. He'd created a network of protection for people like her, people who'd been made invisible, abused, silenced. And buried in those files was a folder labeled Carter Mark, Investigation File, Alpha Priority. Her father had been watching Mark for 2 full years before he died. Every affair, every hidden account, every lie Mark told her while pretending to be a devoted husband. William Hayes had documented it all, waiting for the day his daughter would need the truth in her hands like a loaded weapon. But here's what made Evelyn's hands shake as she read through page after page of evidence. Mark hadn't just been cheating with Sienna Blake. There were 4 other women over 3 years, including one of Evelyn's former co-workers who'd smiled in her face at playdates while sleeping with her husband. Mark had opened credit cards in Evelyn's name without her knowledge, racking up debt he planned to hide until he could blame her for it. And worst of all, he'd met with a lawyer 6 months before the Christmas party to discuss divorcing Evelyn and claiming she was mentally unstable to gain full custody. But he'd waited because his mistress Sienna convinced him to stay married until he secured the deals he needed from her company first. Mark had planned to leave her. He'd planned to take the children. He'd planned to destroy her credibility. The only thing that stopped him was discovering she was worth $2.3 trillion, and suddenly his strategy shifted from abandonment to entitlement. Noah and Lily were in the next room playing with their new puppy, a golden retriever. Evelyn had gotten them after the divorce, trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy in a life that had exploded into mansions, security guards, and strangers who bowed when she entered rooms. The twins had nightmares sometimes. Noah woke up crying, asking if Daddy was going to take them away. Lily had started wetting the bed again, something she hadn't done since she was 3. And Evelyn, 7 months pregnant, exhausted, grieving a father she never knew, and a marriage that had been a lie, had to be strong enough for all of them while learning to run an empire she didn't ask for. But Mark wasn't done. Because 3 days after filing for custody, he did an interview with a major news outlet, sitting in a borrowed apartment looking humble and hurt, telling a story about a wife who'd hidden her true identity, manipulated him into marriage, and was now using her wealth to keep him from his children. He cried on camera. He called himself a victim. He said Evelyn had changed, that power had corrupted her, that she'd become cold and ruthless, and nothing like the woman he'd married. The interview went viral. Millions of people watched Mark Carter, the devastated father, the betrayed husband, the man fighting against a system designed to protect the rich and powerful. What viewers didn't know was that Evelyn's legal team had been waiting for exactly this move. And what Mark didn't know was that every single thing he'd just said on national television was about to be dismantled, word by word, lie by lie, in front of the entire world. Evelyn sat in her office watching the interview on her laptop, her hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling her daughter kick. Yes, daughter. The ultrasound had confirmed it 2 weeks ago. Another girl. Mark didn't know. He'd never asked. In the interview, he was saying, "I just want my children back. I want them to know their father loves them." The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing what looked like genuine anguish. Evelyn felt her jaw tighten. She'd seen that expression before. The night he proposed, the day the twins were born, every time he needed her to believe something that wasn't true. Daniel Rowe walked into the office without knocking. He'd become more than her father's executor. He'd become her strategist, her protector, the person who understood the empire better than anyone alive. He looked at the screen, then at Evelyn. His voice was calm. "Are you ready?" She closed the laptop. Her hands were steady now, no more shaking, no more second-guessing. She looked up at Daniel and said quietly, "Show me everything. Show me every piece of evidence my father collected. Every affair, every lie, every document, and then call a press conference for tomorrow morning." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Tomorrow? That's fast." Evelyn stood slowly, one hand supporting her back, the other resting protectively on her belly. "Every hour that interview is out there, people believe him. Every hour I wait, my children see their father on television calling their mother a liar. Every hour I stay silent. I'm the woman I used to be. The one who waited, the one who hoped things would get better. I'm done waiting, Daniel." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. There was something in his expression that looked almost like pride. "Your father would have approved. He always said the most dangerous people are the ones everyone underestimates." Evelyn touched the necklace at her throat, her mother's necklace, the one that had led her father's people to find her. "I'm not dangerous," she said softly. "I'm just done being silent." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She walked through the massive house her father had built but never lived in, a house that now belonged to her, filled with furniture she hadn't chosen and art she didn't understand, and rooms that echoed with emptiness. She found herself in the twins' room, watching them sleep. Noah was curled around his stuffed bear, the one he'd had since he was a baby. Lily was sprawled across her bed, blankets kicked off, fearless even in sleep. They looked so small, so fragile, and Mark wanted to take them from her. She thought about the interview, about Mark's tears, about the millions of people who'd watched and believed him, about the comments she'd seen online before Daniel made her stop reading them. Gold digger, manipulator. She trapped him with those kids, and then revealed she was rich. Poor guy never had a chance. The words had burned, but not the way they would have 3 months ago. Now they just made her more certain. Evelyn sat carefully in the rocking chair between the twins' beds and opened the folder Daniel had given her. Inside were printouts, text messages between Mark and Sienna. "We just have to wait until the deals close, then I'll file." "She won't fight. She never fights." Another one, from Mark to a different woman. "My wife doesn't understand ambition. She's content being nobody." And another, the one that made Evelyn's hands shake again, but this time with rage. "If I claim she's unstable, no judge will give her custody. She has no money, no family, no support. She'll have to accept whatever I offer." He'd written that 6 months before the Christmas party, 6 months before he knew she was William Hayes's daughter. He'd planned to destroy her when he thought she was powerless. Now that she had power, he wanted half of it. Evelyn closed the folder and looked at her sleeping children. "Tomorrow," she thought. "Tomorrow the world sees who you really are, not through my words, through yours." The next morning, Evelyn stood in front of a room full of reporters, cameras, and curious strangers who'd come because the reclusive trillionaire heiress had called her first press conference. She wore a simple navy dress that accommodated her pregnancy, her mother's necklace, and nothing else. No jewelry, no makeup. Artists, no performance, just the truth. She stepped up to the microphone, her hands resting on the podium, and began. "My name is Evelyn Hayes Carter. 3 months ago, I learned that my father, William Hayes, had passed away and left me an inheritance that changed my life in ways I'm still processing. What didn't change was my commitment to my children, my integrity, or my memory. My ex-husband gave an interview 3 days ago painting me as someone who deceived him, who hid my identity, who's using wealth to keep him from his children. I'm here today to set the record straight, not with my words, with his." The screen behind her lit up. Text messages appeared, blown up large enough for every camera to capture. The room went completely silent. Mark's words, his plans, his cruelty, all laid out in his own handwriting, his own voice, his own damning admissions. The reporters started murmuring, cameras flashed, and Evelyn continued, her voice never wavering. "These messages were sent 6 months before I knew anything about my father's estate, 6 months before I had any wealth or power. My ex-husband planned to leave me, claim I was mentally unstable, and take my children when he believed I had no ability to fight back. The only thing that changed his plan was learning I had money. Then suddenly, he didn't want a divorce. He wanted half of everything." Another screen lit up. Security footage from the Christmas party. Mark laughing while Sienna humiliated Evelyn. Mark telling his son to listen to his mistress instead of protecting him. Mark posing for photos with Sienna's hand on his arm while his wife stood alone. The footage was silent, but devastating. You could see everything. The cruelty, the indifference, the moment Evelyn's face changed from hurt to something harder. And then Evelyn played audio. A recording of Mark talking to his lawyer, planning the custody strategy, discussing how to portray Evelyn as an unfit mother. His voice was clear, confident, calculating. She's not smart enough to fight this. She'll accept whatever terms we offer because she'll be terrified of losing them completely. The room erupted. Questions flew. Cameras pivoted. And Evelyn stood there, 7 months pregnant, utterly calm, and said one final thing. I didn't hide who I was. I didn't know who I was. My father kept his wealth secret to protect me. But my ex-husband's cruelty was never a secret. It was just invisible to everyone except me and my children. Now you see it too. And now you know exactly who's telling the truth. She walked off the stage without taking questions. Daniel met her at the side exit. The footage was already going viral. Within an hour, Mark's interview had been ratioed, torn apart, dissected by legal experts and social media alike. His lawyer released a statement trying to claim the evidence was taken out of context. No one believed him. By that evening, Mark Carter was the most hated man on the internet. But Evelyn wasn't watching. She was home, sitting on the floor with Noah and Lily, playing with blocks, her daughter kicking rhythmically against her ribs. She'd done what she needed to do. Now she just wanted to be their mother. The custody hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks after the press conference, but Mark's lawyers tried to delay it 3 times. Each time, the judge, a woman in her early 60s named Patricia Holbrook, denied the motion. Judge Holbrook had been appointed to the bench 17 years ago after a career prosecuting domestic violence cases. What Mark didn't know, what his lawyers hadn't bothered to research, was that Judge Holbrook's first major case out of law school had been funded by a grant from the Hayes Foundation. She didn't owe Evelyn anything, but she owed the truth everything. And she'd seen the press conference footage like everyone else in the country. The morning of the hearing, Evelyn woke up at 5 a.m. with contractions. Not labor, her doctor assured her over the phone, just Braxton Hicks, practice contractions, her body preparing. But they hurt. They made her breathe carefully, slowly, one hand pressed against her lower back. Noah found her in the kitchen at 6, already dressed in a gray suit that made her look older, more severe, more like someone who'd inherited an empire instead of someone who still remembered what it felt like to mend her children's coats to save money. "Mommy, are we going to see Daddy today?" Noah's voice was small, uncertain. He was 7 now, old enough to understand that something was broken between his parents, too young to understand why. Evelyn knelt down slowly, carefully, ignoring the pressure in her belly. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to court. The judge is going to ask some questions and then decide what's best for you and Lily." Noah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to leave you." Evelyn pulled him close, breathing in the smell of his shampoo, feeling his small heart beating against her chest. "You're not going anywhere, I promise. I will never let anyone take you from me." She meant it, not as a hope, as a fact. Because Evelyn had learned something in the 3 months since the Christmas party. Power wasn't just about money or influence or the ability to make phone calls that moved mountains. Power was about deciding what you would and wouldn't accept and then building a life around that choice. She would not accept losing her children. Everything else was just strategy. The courthouse was surrounded by media, cameras everywhere, reporters shouting questions. Evelyn's security team, led by a former Secret Service agent named Marcus Webb who'd been assigned by Daniel, created a path through the chaos. Mark arrived separately, flanked by his own lawyers, looking thinner than she remembered, his suit expensive but ill-fitting, like he'd borrowed it or lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. Their eyes met for just a second across the courthouse steps. His expression was complicated. Anger, yes, but also something that looked like fear. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Evelyn expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, rows of benches mostly empty except for a few reporters who'd been granted access, and Daniel sitting quietly in the back, his presence a reminder that Evelyn wasn't alone. Judge Holbrook entered and everyone stood. She was shorter than she looked in photos, but her presence filled the room. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and looked directly at Mark, then at Evelyn. "This is a custody hearing, not a trial," she began, her voice crisp and no nonsense. But given the public nature of recent events, I want to make something very clear. I don't care about wealth. I don't care about press conferences. I don't care about public opinion. I care about two children, Noah and Lily Carter, and what serves their best interests. Everything else is noise. She looked at Mark's lawyer. Mr. Patterson, you may present your case. Mark's lawyer stood. He was expensive, polished, the kind of attorney who'd built a career defending rich men in ugly divorces. Your Honor, my client is a devoted father who's been systematically alienated from his children by a woman who, upon inheriting extraordinary wealth, has used that wealth to isolate, intimidate, and exclude him from their lives. He's not seeking money. He's seeking equal custody of the children he loves. Judge Holbrook's expression didn't change. Continue. The lawyer presented his case, Mark's involvement in the twins' early years, photos of him at birthday parties, school events, family dinners, testimony from co-workers who described him as a dedicated father who talked about his kids constantly, a psychologist's evaluation suggesting that children benefit from having both parents actively involved. It was smooth, professional, and completely ignored everything that had been revealed in the press conference. When it was Evelyn's turn, her lawyer, a woman named Sarah Chen, who'd been personally recommended by Daniel and was known for destroying opposing counsel with surgical precision, stood slowly. Your Honor, we could spend hours debating theory, or we could spend 5 minutes looking at facts. She clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up with a timeline. Let's start 6 months before Mrs. Carter knew anything about her inheritance. What followed was devastating. Not just the text messages from the press conference, but new evidence. Financial records showing Mark had opened credit cards in Evelyn's name, maxing them out and hiding the statements. Emails between Mark and Sienna discussing their affair, including one where Mark wrote, "She's too stupid to notice. She just keeps smiling and believing me." Phone records showing Mark had contacted a private investigator to dig up dirt on Evelyn to use in a custody battle, back when he thought she had no resources to fight. But the moment that changed everything came when Sarah played audio from the Christmas party. Someone, probably hotel security or a guest, had recorded the moment Sienna suggested the twins be moved to a side room. You could hear Noah's small voice saying, "But Daddy said this is a family party." And then, Mark's response, cold and dismissive. "Noah, listen to Ms. Blake." The courtroom went silent. Judge Holbrook's expression hardened. She looked at Mark. "Mr. Carter, stand up." Mark stood, his face pale. Judge Holbrook leaned forward. "I've been a judge for 17 years. I've seen parents fight over children for spite, for money, for control. But I've rarely seen someone quite so clearly documented planning to destroy the other parent before they even filed for divorce." She gestured to the screen. "These messages, these recordings, they're not taken out of context. They're not misunderstandings. They're premeditated cruelty." Mark's lawyer tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, my client was under significant stress." Judge Holbrook cut him off. "Stress doesn't make you open credit cards in your wife's name. Stress doesn't make you plan to claim she's mentally unstable to steal custody. Stress doesn't make you publicly humiliate her while carrying on an affair." She looked back at Mark. "You didn't want your children, Mr. Carter. You wanted to win. And when your wife turned out to have resources you couldn't control, you decided winning meant taking half of everything she inherited." Mark's voice was desperate. "That's not true. I love my kids." Judge Holbrook's eyes were ice. "Then why, in 2 years of documented messages, do you mention them exactly 4 times? And 3 of those times were discussing how to use them as leverage." She closed the folder in front of her. "Here's my ruling. Full physical custody to Mrs. Carter, supervised visitation for Mr. Carter 2 hours per week, supervised by a court-appointed monitor, no overnight visits, no decision-making authority. And Mr. Carter, if you violate these terms even once, you'll lose visitation entirely." She banged her gavel. "We're adjourned." Mark's face crumbled. He looked at Evelyn like he wanted to say something, but his lawyer pulled him toward the exit. The reporters rushed out to file their stories, and Evelyn sat perfectly still, one hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick, thinking, "It's over. It's finally over." But it wasn't. Because as Evelyn walked out of the courtroom with Daniel beside her, Marcus the security guard close behind, a reporter shoved through the crowd and shouted a question that made her stop cold. "Mrs. Carter, is it true your father's fortune came from illegal arms deals and trafficking? Is that why he kept it secret?" Evelyn turned slowly. The reporter was young, eager, holding a microphone with a logo she recognized, one of the few outlets not controlled by her father's network. What are you talking about? The reporter pushed closer. We've been investigating the Hayes Foundation. There are offshore accounts, shell companies, transactions that don't make sense. Some people are saying your father wasn't a businessman. He was a criminal. And you just inherited a criminal empire. The words hit like a physical blow. Evelyn's vision swam. Daniel stepped forward immediately, his voice sharp. No comment. This interview is over. But Evelyn grabbed his arm. Wait. She looked at the reporter. What evidence do you have? The reporter hesitated, then said, We're still gathering it. But there's enough to ask questions. Enough to wonder if the woman everyone's calling a victim is actually the heir to something much darker. Evelyn felt the ground shift under her feet, not from the pregnancy, not from exhaustion, from the sudden terrifying realization that she didn't actually know where her father's money came from. She'd inherited it. She'd used it. She'd built her new life on it, but she'd never asked the one question that now seemed obvious. How does someone secretly control $2.3 trillion without breaking laws? That night, Evelyn sat in her father's office surrounded by files, documents, spreadsheets she barely understood. Daniel sat across from her, his expression grave. Tell me the truth, she said quietly. Was my father a criminal? Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then he said carefully, Your father operated in gray areas. He made money in ways that weren't always legal, but weren't always prosecutable. He owned pieces of companies that did things he didn't personally control. He funded foundations that did genuine good, but also served as tax shelters. He was brilliant at staying just on the edge of the line. That's not an answer, Evelyn said. Daniel met her eyes. Your father was complicated. He protected you by staying hidden, but being hidden meant operating in shadows, and shadows attract darkness. Did he do illegal things? Probably. Did he hurt people? Possibly. But he also saved thousands of lives through the medical foundations he funded. He educated children who'd never have had a chance. He protected women like your mother from men who would have destroyed them. He was not a good man or a bad man. He was a powerful man who made choices most people never have to make. Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes. She was so tired, so pregnant, so overwhelmed. I don't want dirty money, she whispered. I don't want to build my children's future on something wrong. Daniel leaned forward. Then don't. You control everything now. You can investigate every account, every investment, every transaction. You can divest from anything you find unethical. You can reshape the entire empire into something clean. But it will take time, and it will make enemies. People who benefited from your father's gray areas won't want transparency. Evelyn looked down at her hands. They were shaking again. For 3 months she'd felt powerful, in control, like she'd finally escaped being the woman everyone could hurt. But now she realized she'd just traded one kind of vulnerability for another. Before, she was powerless. Now, she was powerful, but morally compromised. Which was worse? She thought about her mother, about the envelopes that arrived once a year with no return address, about her mother's face when she saw William Hayes standing across the street at Evelyn's graduation. Her mother had known something, had accepted something, had taken the money and stayed silent because silence kept them safe and fed and alive. Did that make her weak, or did that make her a survivor? Evelyn stood up slowly, her hand supporting her back. I need to know everything. Start an audit. Every account, every company, every investment. If there's illegal activity, I want it documented and reported. If there's unethical business, I want it sold or shut down. I don't care how long it takes or who it angers. She looked at Daniel. My father built this in secret to protect me. I'm going to tear it apart in public to protect my children, because I won't raise them on blood money. Daniel smiled. It was a real smile, the first she'd seen from him. Your father would have been proud. Or terrified, possibly both. Evelyn touched her belly. Her daughter was quiet now, sleeping probably, unaware that her mother was about to upend an empire before she was even born. Good, Evelyn said softly. Terrified means I'm doing something that matters. The audit took 4 months. 4 months of lawyers, forensic accountants, investigators combing through decades of William Hayes's carefully constructed empire. 4 months of Evelyn giving birth to a healthy baby girl she named Catherine after her mother, and learning to balance nursing a newborn while dismantling a trillion-dollar web of companies she didn't fully understand. 4 months of sleepless nights, not just from the baby crying, but from the nightmares that came when she closed her eyes and saw the things her father had been involved in. Arms deals to questionable governments, investments in companies that exploited workers, shadow financing for political campaigns that served agendas she found morally repugnant. Her father hadn't been a monster, but he hadn't been a hero either. He'd been a man who believed the ends justified the means, and the ends were keeping his daughter safe. What Evelyn discovered was this: about 40% of her father's wealth was completely clean. Legitimate investments, technology companies, medical research, foundations that genuinely helped people. Another 40% existed in gray areas, legally defensible but ethically questionable, the kind of things rich people did because they could and because no one was watching closely enough to stop them. And the final 20%, roughly $460 billion, came from sources that were unambiguously wrong. Money laundering schemes, offshore accounts connected to dictators, investments in private prisons and weapons manufacturers, and pharmaceutical companies that had prioritized profit over human lives. Evelyn liquidated all of it, every questionable asset, every gray area investment, every company that profited from suffering. She didn't do it quietly. She held another press conference, this one with baby Catherine sleeping against her chest in a wrap, and explained exactly what she'd found and what she was doing about it. My father built an empire in secret, and some of that empire was built on things I cannot and will not defend. I'm divesting from every unethical investment. I'm shutting down shell companies that exist only to hide money. And I'm donating $460 billion to organizations that directly counter the harm some of these investments caused. The financial world called her insane, reckless, naive. One analyst on a major news network said she was throwing away generational wealth because she didn't understand how money actually worked. But other people who'd been hurt by the systems her father had profited from, started paying attention. Workers whose jobs had been destroyed by companies Hayes had invested in, families who'd lost loved ones to opioids manufactured by pharmaceutical companies in his portfolio. Veterans damaged by wars his weapons funding had prolonged. They watched this young woman, barely 32, holding a newborn baby, systematically destroying her own fortune to do what was right instead of what was profitable. And slowly, something shifted. The story stopped being about a gold digger who'd trapped a man and inherited dirty money. It became about a woman who'd chosen integrity over wealth, who'd walked away from nearly $500 billion because keeping it meant compromising her soul. Evelyn didn't do it for the narrative. She did it because Noah had asked her one night, while she was reading him a bedtime story, "Mommy, why do people say Grandpa was bad?" And she'd realized she couldn't answer that question while still holding on to the money that made him bad. Mark tried one more time. 6 months after the custody hearing, after Evelyn had given away nearly half her inheritance, after she'd restructured the empire into something clean and transparent, he filed another motion. This time claiming that Evelyn's divestment proved she was mentally unstable, that she was squandering the children's inheritance, that he needed to protect them from her financial recklessness. The motion was denied within 48 hours. Judge Holbrook didn't even schedule a hearing. She wrote in her ruling, "Mr. Carter continues to confuse his children's well-being with his own financial interest. Mrs. Carter's choice to divest from unethical investments demonstrates exactly the kind of moral judgment we should hope to see in a parent." Mark's supervised visitations continued for a while. 2 hours a week, always monitored, always strained. Noah was polite but distant. Lily barely spoke to him. And after 8 months, Mark stopped showing up. His lawyer sent a letter saying Mark was focusing on rebuilding his career and thought it would be less confusing for the children if he stepped back for a while. Evelyn read the letter twice, waiting to feel something. Anger, maybe, or vindication. But all she felt was tired, and maybe a little sad. Not for herself. For the man Mark could have been if he'd chosen differently. 1 year after the Christmas party, Evelyn stood in the ballroom of the same hotel. It looked different now. Not because the space had changed, but because she had. She was hosting a fundraiser for a foundation she'd created, one that provided legal services and financial support to women leaving abusive marriages. The guest list was different this time. Not senators and CEOs trying to curry favor, just people who'd survived, who'd fought, who'd refused to stay silent, women like her mother, women like the person she used to be. Noah and Lily were there, dressed up and excited, helping hand out programs. Baby Catherine was with a nanny upstairs, probably sleeping through the whole thing, and Evelyn wore the same simple green dress from that night, the one that used to make her feel invisible. She'd had it altered to fit her post-pregnancy body, but she'd kept it intentionally. A reminder, not of the pain, but of the moment she'd stopped accepting it. Daniel found her standing near the registration table, the exact spot where she'd picked up the guest list that had changed everything. "You know," he said quietly, "your father planned that night for 3 years. He knew exactly when to reveal your inheritance. He knew Mark would be there. He knew how it would unfold." Evelyn looked at him. "He wanted Mark humiliated?" Daniel shook his head. "He wanted you freed. He knew you'd never leave Mark on your own. You loved him too much. You were too loyal. So he built a moment where you'd have no choice but to see the truth. The guest list, the foundation coordination, even Sienna's invitation, it was all designed to put you in a position where you'd finally understand your own worth." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "That's manipulative," Daniel smiled. "That's love. Complicated, flawed, manipulative love. Your father couldn't be there for you, so he built a future where you wouldn't need him to be. He gave you power, yes, but more than that, he gave you a reason to use it." Later that night, after the fundraiser ended and the twins were asleep and baby Catherine was nursing quietly in her arms, Evelyn sat in the dark nursery and thought about everything that had happened. The Christmas party, the divorce, the audit, the choice to give away nearly half her inheritance, the choice to rebuild what remained into something good. She thought about Mark, wherever he was, probably still angry, still convinced he'd been wronged. She thought about Sienna, who'd sent a handwritten apology letter 6 months ago that Evelyn had read once and never responded to. She thought about her mother, who'd raised her alone with quiet strength and secrets she'd carried to the grave. And she thought about her father, the man she'd never known, who'd watched her from a distance and built an empire in the shadows and left her everything, including the mess of figuring out what to do with it. Was he a good man? She didn't know. Would she have loved him if she'd known him? She didn't know that either. But she knew this. He'd given her a choice, and she'd chosen to be different, not perfect, not uncomplicated, but different. Catherine finished nursing and fell asleep against Evelyn's chest, her tiny hand curled around Evelyn's finger. Evelyn looked down at her daughter and whispered, "I'm going to tell you about your grandfather someday. The good and the bad, the empire and the exile, the money and the morals, and then I'm going to let you decide for yourself what it all means. Because that's what love is, not protecting you from the truth, but giving you the strength to handle it." She stood carefully and laid Catherine in her crib. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the city lights stretching endlessly in every direction. Somewhere out there were women standing in back corners of rooms being made invisible by people who should see them. Somewhere were children watching their parents choose cruelty over kindness. Somewhere were people being told they didn't matter, that they were background, that they should be grateful for whatever scraps they were given. And Evelyn couldn't save all of them. She couldn't fix every broken marriage or stop every humiliation or prevent every moment of pain. But she could do what her father had done in his own flawed way. She could build something, not in secret this time, not in shadows, but in the open, in the light, where people could see it, and maybe, just maybe, believe that they deserved better, too. 2 years after the Christmas party, Mark sent a message through his lawyer. He wanted to see the children, not for custody, not for money, just to see them, to try to rebuild something. Evelyn read the message 3 times. Then she called Daniel. "What do you think?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I think people can change, not always, but sometimes. And I think your children deserve the chance to know their father if he's genuinely trying, but only if you feel safe, only if it's on your terms." Evelyn thought about it for a week. Then she agreed. Supervised visits in a public place with her present. Mark showed up at the park on a Saturday morning looking older, humbler, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt instead of the expensive suits he used to armor himself in. Noah was cautious. Lily was skeptical. But after an hour of awkward conversation and playing on the swings, something small shifted. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just the tiny possibility that maybe someday they could build something different from the wreckage. Evelyn watched from a bench, Catherine sleeping in her stroller beside her. Mark caught her eye once and mouthed, "Thank you." She nodded, not because she forgave him, not because she'd forgotten, but because she'd learned something her father never had. That power wasn't just about control or protection or building walls high enough to keep the danger out. Sometimes power was about opening a door and seeing what walked through. and trusting yourself enough to close it again if you needed to. 5 years after the Christmas party, Evelyn stood in front of a Senate committee investigating financial reform. She was testifying about the shell companies and offshore accounts that had allowed her father to hide his wealth for decades. She wasn't defending him. She was explaining exactly how he'd done it so the loopholes could be closed. Some people called her a traitor to her class. Others called her brave. Evelyn didn't care much about either label. She just knew that the systems that had hidden her father's empire were the same systems that allowed rich people to escape accountability, while everyone else suffered the consequences. When the hearing ended, she walked out of the Capitol building into the spring sunshine. Noah and Lily were waiting with Daniel. They were 12 now, tall and confident and remarkably well-adjusted considering everything they'd been through. Catherine was 5. Obsessed with dinosaurs and absolutely fearless. They looked at their mother and Noah asked, "Did you change the world today, Mom?" Evelyn laughed. "Not yet, but maybe I moved it an inch." Catherine grabbed her hand. "That's good, Mommy. Inches add up." Evelyn squeezed her daughter's hand and thought, yes, they do. That night, Evelyn sat at her desk and opened the bottom drawer where she kept her father's letter, the one he'd written before he died. She'd read it 100 times, but tonight she noticed something she'd missed before. At the very bottom, in handwriting so small, she'd thought it was just a scratch mark, were 4 more words. "You were always enough." Evelyn traced the words with her finger. Then she closed the letter, put it back in the drawer, and turned off the light. She was enough, not because of the money, not because of the empire, not because she'd given it away or kept it, or done the right thing or made mistakes. She was enough because she'd decided she was. And no one, not Mark, not Sienna, not even her father's ghost could take that away from her. 3 months later, Evelyn received a letter from Mark. A real letter, handwritten, not sent through lawyers. It was short, just 3 paragraphs. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I can't undo what I did. But I'm trying to be better, for myself, and hopefully, someday, for them. Thank you for giving me the chance." Evelyn read it once. Then she put it in a box with all the other artifacts from that chapter of her life. The custody papers, the press clippings, the photograph from the Christmas party that someone had taken of her standing in the back corner, hand on her barely showing belly, face full of hurt she'd been trying to hide. She looked at that photograph for a long time. Then she closed the box and put it in storage. Not forgotten, but finished. And Evelyn Carter, daughter of William Hayes, mother of 3, inheritor of an empire she'd chosen to reshape rather than simply rule, walked upstairs to read her children a bedtime story. Not about princesses who needed saving, but about ordinary people who discovered they were extraordinary all along. They just needed someone to stop telling them they weren't. The end. Dear viewers, if you've made it this far, you've just witnessed something powerful. Not just a story about revenge or wealth or justice, but a story about a woman who refused to stay invisible, who chose integrity over comfort, who walked away from nearly $500 billion because keeping it meant losing herself. Evelyn's journey from that back corner of the Christmas party to the Senate chambers didn't happen because she inherited money. It happened because she decided she mattered, and that decision changed everything. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Evelyn's struggle, if you've ever been made to feel like background decoration in your own life, then I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel, click that button and join a community of people who believe that being underestimated is not the end of your story. It's just the beginning. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story about people who refused to stay silent, who chose themselves even when it cost them everything, who proved that real power doesn't come from what you have, but from who you decide to be. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What moment in Evelyn's story hit you the hardest? Was it when she realized the room was already hers? When she gave away the dirty money? When she let Mark try again with the kids? Or when she finally understood she was always enough? Your story matters. Your voice matters. And this community is built on people who know that invisible doesn't mean powerless. Subscribe now. Turn on notifications. And let's keep telling stories about people who rise not because someone lifted them up, but because they finally stopped waiting for permission to stand. Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing Evelyn's journey. And thank you for believing that everyone, especially those the world tries to silence, deserves to be seen.